Hello there and welcome to MoCDA Talk Series. We're connecting with Pinar Yoldas, Turkish-American architect, artist and professor at the University of California, San Diego. Her work develops with biological sciences and digital technologies through architectural installations, kinetic sculptures, sound, video, drawing, with a focus on post-humanism, eco-nihilism, Anthropocene, and feminist technoscience. Enjoy this talk.
Hi.
Hi,
Hey there. How are you?
I'm good. Just working, and this is my work break. Talking to you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this live. It's so nice to see that you're outside.
I am actually. Yeah, this is one thing that I have going for me. I have a courtyard in my house where I'm, my apartment. Parks and beaches and everything else. So this is the only place where we can, just kind of be outside and get some exposure to sun and
That's nice. It must be nice during
trees.
these days.
It is nice. I can't complain. The only thing is, though, I'm noticing as much as I want to give you a green and beautiful background, when I walk to that way, I just can't get internet, so I'll have to probably walk back inside. But oh well, I tried, so I'm gonna walk back. All
Well,
right,
thank
cool.
you for sharing the garden with us. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Um,
Uh,
yeah, I'll just find like a spot and just stay put there. I think
sure,
maybe this is better. All right, cool.
that's fine.
Cool.
Yeah, the internet seems to work fine, so.
Okay, great. All right. Okay.
So nice to meet you. I've been seeing your work, and I came across your work at the Royal Academy not long ago when I went to see Eco Visionaries. And I saw your work, and I was very impressed about the creation that you built. And I was curious, I got really interested in your work, so I started researching and looking through the sculptures that you create and the fact that you came from architecture, neuroscience, and combining those elements into the works that you create. And I was hoping you could share with us your background and how you got to your creations.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for getting in touch with me. I also really appreciate what you're doing with this, Museum of Contemporary Digital Art. I think it's very necessary, especially with COVID-19 and everybody being on lockdown. We realize how, functional this could be, and how art can actually reach people beyond, the walls of the galleries and museums. So this is really good. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, back to my background. I have a very eclectic background in that I didn't start off as an artist. I actually started, let's say, my educational, career, or my educational background, as a scientist. And I was very interested in chemistry. So I was like doing chemistry for a while. And then I studied architecture. Then I did other degrees in computer science, and as I was, looking into computer science, and I noticed that there's this wonderful field called neuroscience. Back then, it wasn't like a very, popular field. It was kind of like an emerging field, at least for me. And I was very drawn to it because I thought that if I could understand how the brain works, I could become a better artist. And I decided to study it. So after architecture and some other master's degrees, I went to Duke University, where I focused on affective neuroscience, which is a branch of neuroscience that studies emotion, and computational media, and that's where I did my PhD. But the work you've seen in Royal Academy and Ecosystem of Access actually kind of developed alongside that career, that education. As you know, I was getting my PhD, I was already showing this. And it was basically a response to, this cultural shock I experienced moving from Turkey. I grew up in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
To Los Angeles, and just overnight noticing that I started creating 3 times more trash and waste, just getting by, just having lunch. I was using disposable plastics, and everything was served in disposable containers, etc. And then I learned about this phenomenon called the Pacific Trash Vortex in 2006. And it was actually really late in the game because it was discovered in 1997 by Captain Moore. And he has been an eco-activist and an advocate for the oceans for almost a decade by the time I discovered him. But I was really shocked to hear that there was plastic waste, floating plastic waste in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And now when I talk about this to you, we're in 2020, we're like, yeah, of course everybody knows there's plastic everywhere, but we didn't. This
I know,
wasn't
yeah.
something
I was,
that we talked about in 2006, 2007. We did not care about this. Nobody was giving glass straws or steel straws or whatever, or take-home cups. Now, of course, with the virus,
yeah,
we're going back to disposables, but it wasn't something that was in our public consciousness. But I have to say that when I discovered this, I saw some images by Chris Jordan, who's a photographer, and he's a pioneer, I would say, in this kind of anti-plastic movement as well. And I saw an image by him which became a poster child of a seagull. No, it wasn't a seagull, sorry, a Laysan albatross in the process of decay. And as it's decaying, as its flesh and feathers are, decomposing, you see this like plastic bottle caps and a lighter and a big pan being revealed in its digestive tract. So I remember very vividly the first moment I saw this image, I had goosebumps. Because, it's like I was very naive, thinking that, okay, the world has problems, etc. But it never occurred to me that out there in the middle of the ocean, there is this beautiful, beautiful wildlife, and our civilization has made it all the way to their digestive tract. It did not occur to me, and I would consider myself an intellectual, someone who had environmental tendencies, right? So that will mark the beginning of that project for me. I questioned what I was doing as an artist and a designer, and I thought that, I don't want any other clients. I don't care about whatever I'm supposed to build for humans. I really want to use my skills and energy to work on this. And it took me about 4 years to finish my research phase. I learned a lot about how plastics is produced and how it's distributed. I learned about different types of plastics. I learned about plastics in our food, in our water. I learned about pelagic plastics, which is plastics in the ocean. And I realized that if we go at this rate, the oceans will be full of plastics within, like 50 years, or actually now faster. This was back in, 2010. And I decided that I should, make a project where I can offer a parallel, narrative where the oceans are full of plastics, and now we have nothing but creatures that can live off of plastics. So this was basically, hey, we killed the biodiversity, we killed the Laysan albatross, we killed the blue whales, we killed the dolphins, we killed the marine turtles, right? We damaged all of that. But because life is the most powerful force on Earth, life will find a way, and there will be new life forms that emerge out of this plastic ooze. Of course, one inspiration was the primordial ooze theory, like the oceans being the ancient wombs of life. But I also wanted to kind of do a project that was both hopeful and dark at the same time.
I understand. So it's like in your vision, life has adapted, and so plastic has been integrated in the way organism function. And how, I find very interesting the shapes and the how you create those organisms. What does it inspire you to create such forms, such bodies, such creatures?
I think that's a very, very beautiful question. I think formal vocabulary is really based on the natural world. Of course, I'm inspired by what my fellow designers and artists do, and I respect that. But most of the formal vocabulary comes from the study of actual marine birds or actual marine turtles or fish or marine life in general. I went to so many different aquariums and, looked at a lot of different publications. And for instance, I was designing aquatic insects for that project because one fact is that with the introduction of microplastics in the ocean, microplastics is when plastic breaks down over like their long journey. It takes about 6 years for the coastal plastics or waste plastics to make it to the Pacific trash vortex, which is the gyre, right? And over this process, they break down and they turn into these very small particles, like between 5 nanometers to 12 nanometers or more, or 50 nanometers. But these particles help aquatic insects, which normally don't like living out in the open ocean, to lay their eggs on a substrate. So they serve for ovipositioning. So first I learned about that, and I talked to a bunch of entomologists, and I learned about aquatic insect anatomy. I went to some natural history museums and looked at how insects live and how they create the whole egg thing. And after that, I designed the plastic insects, which became a very, crucial step in the food chain of an entirely plastic ecosystem. So again, primarily my inspiration comes from the natural world. Mm-hmm. I believe that our understanding of beauty is heavily shaped by the natural world around us, and we're very good at abstracting the colors.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the colors because they're very bright.
Yeah, and the light and all the things that meant life and health and I don't know, the joy of life. We're very good at abstracting that and taking it and putting it into our furniture or carpet or I don't know, dinnerware or fashion. We're good at abstracting that, but I think the source is just like anything else, nature itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a question coming through. Do you think the term Anthropocene is still accurate way to describe this time? And somebody suggested that perhaps the term Capitalocene is more accurate term instead of Anthropocene.
I think that's the beautiful question. I mean, there is a practical reason why we need these terms, because that helps us, anchor ourselves in the specific moment in the history of the earth, right? But at the same time, it doesn't really matter what we call this. I think now that we are experiencing this very interesting phenomenon, we're experiencing COVID-19, a natural force that is spreading so fast, and it's so easy for it to spread because there's so many of us. Maybe Anthropocene does make sense because not everybody who is inhabiting the earth, not every single human being is a capitalist, right? But there is, of course, the force behind capitalism that is, let's say, of course, the impact of perhaps capitalistic thinking on disregarding, I don't know, our own connection to nature, and that the fact that we're natural creatures. Maybe there's that. I'm not 100% sure, honestly. I won't be like, oh no, Anthropocene is passé, we should now call it Anthropocene, or we should now call this, I don't know, virolocene. I don't know. We can come up with multiple terms. To me, it doesn't really matter as long as we understand what we're talking about, which is human beings have become the most dominant force on the face of the planet. And this is not necessarily great for other living things.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you, I've seen you've been quite productive lately on your Instagram account, and I saw you know, those beautiful goddess that you've made, and I wonder whether those were inspired by the situation we're all experiencing, you know, the virus, and the fact that maybe these are creatures coming from the future or heading to the future with
Right.
with a vision of the past.
Yeah, that's it's hard to tell for me right now because we're still in it.
Hmm.
Like I'm still understanding what's going on, and what I'm still wondering what will happen after this. Is this going to be a moment of great transformation? For instance, I myself, but of course I'm lucky because I have, you know, soil and kind of a garden around me. I planted things 3 weeks ago, and now I have, you know, these little plants joining me, and I'm just kind of reconnecting in that way. Is this going to be a moment for us to understand our interdependence on, let's say, big food, right? Or big pharma, like big industries? And is this going to be a kind of a wake-up call for us to be more, how to say, independent of that? Is this going to be a wake-up call for us to prioritize planetary health? Because there is, of course, I've been seeing papers about why this, you know, one virus became so much more dangerous than other ones, and like how wildlife, how the decrease in, let's say, wildlife areas has caused this pandemic. If wildlife could still be where they are supposed to be, something like this wouldn't spread to humans, for instance. Like I'm still kind of wrapping my head around this. But back to the new work, it's actually kind of old new work for me. I've always believed that there was a time where we invented our own myth and mythology, and we invented, you know, we perhaps represented forces of nature as forces, as like anthropogenic forces, almost not capitalistic, but, you know, the wind would talk to us, the night had a face. I don't know, earth and plants, they had spirits. You know, we kind of had this way of looking at nature and understanding nature. And I was always thinking, okay, now it's gone. Also, God is dead, or religion is dead. So now what? Like, what's happening? Where is myth? So that was kind of connected to that question. I was reading a lot of Bataille, and that also inspired my thinking. Absence of Myth is a very beautiful article. But another, I think, you know, a resource for me is the science fiction writing of Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler.
Hmm.
So I've been reading Octavia Butler maybe the last 3 weeks, and her exogenesis series is all about, you know, these traders, these aliens that can replace and modify genetic material. And that really resonates with me, because I believe that the future of design and the future of perhaps new modes of production lies in, you know, understanding how nature works. And genetic engineering and genes is kind of like this very ancient language of how, you know, the language of nature. So my mind was around there, but I'm also always drawn to like interesting forms, and I'm also learning really simple things like texture mapping. You know, I never knew how to do that, and now I have time, so I'm like, okay, how do we do this? And it's kind of a combination of a lot of things, but it'll take me perhaps 6 more months to sit down and write about them, and perhaps to see them with more clear eyes. But yeah, I'm sorry, it's not a very coherent answer, but there's a lot of background, literary and philosophical background, but it's also impacted by the things I'm learning on a day-to-day basis, like the techniques I'm learning. So,
And is that something specific that you would like to see appearing in your work in terms of technology that you would like to introduce, or anything
Right.
from nature that you think is now more than ever relevant to your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one movement from history of design that resonated a lot with me was Art Nouveau. Their floral forms, and they basically kind of designed everything. Like they designed the table and the chair, they designed the gown, they designed the fork, they designed the house, they designed the machinery around. So this was a very comprehensive approach, but they also wanted to do it by hand. So it was kind of this response to industrialism. They probably felt what was going to happen, right, with mass production. So this was kind of this response, bringing floral forms, bringing like more natural forms, curves, the colors. I think we're having a moment like that with in the digital world. I see more and more people incorporating natural forms or natural morphologies in their work, right?
True, yes,
More
I've noticed that.
linear, more like bodies and plant forms. And first up, I personally love that stuff. Like I even like it when it becomes more grotesque. I'm really interested in like how flesh and fur and skin, nails, like all of that stuff can mix and morph. I'm very drawn to different textures of animals and marine animals especially. So I'm drawn to that, just period. But I also think that this is kind of our general response to what's happening. We're pushed more and more to live more mechanistic lives, to rely on devices, to be, cut off from, let's say, touching the earth, feeling the wind, etc. Like our circadian rhythm even is disrupted, right? So we're kind of more and more cut off from this. We're still able to survive because that's what we're really good at. We adapt to our new environments very fast. But I think part of us miss that. Part of us need that. It's just like putting beautiful forest background on your screen, or like we have these apps, they pick a beautiful scenery from like Colorado mountains, or I don't know, Amazon basin or something, and like you're looking at that while you're checking your emails. So there must be a need for this, right? There are of course actually neuroscientists and popular scientists who write about this, but I think that's also kind of what I'm observing with digital creators. We're like going back to that. We want more of that in our lives, and I think maybe we're trying to find a way, right? Like what's the handshake between living as embedded as we are with technology while still being an animal that we are. So I think that's what we're trying to figure out. But with my current work, I really want to see them as a VR experience.
Oh, okay.
I want to more like immersive. I want people to kind of really see the architecture and the animations that are in my head. I have a very, how to say it, fast and like I have a really good graphic card in my head. Like I'm like, I really want a very specific aesthetic, but it's sometimes hard to get there just on my own. So my dream is to do this as a VR, maybe animated series, maybe something for a streaming media, something a little bit more like a larger narrative. And I'm hoping to find ways to get there.
I understand, yes. This is kind of like leading to a question I also wanted to ask you. Where do you see your work best exhibited? Do you think that a museum or a gallery is the right way to show your work, or do you find the internet or the social media as a place for the work to be experienced? Or if you were going to create a place, how would you see that in the future?
Right. I think these are also really good questions. So when you put the work in a museum, there are a couple things that happen. First off, the museum creates a context. When people walk into the museum, they know that they're going to see art. So you already kind of prime them. Hey, these are the important artists. You're gonna see something that experts handpicked for you, curators or the museum board of members, whatever, and you're going to see it in this context, which is the museum. This is not your home. This is not your kitchen. It is the freaking museum, right? So when you put artworks there, of course it helps the artist in that now your label is officially artist, right? But am I obsessed with putting my work in a museum? Not really. It happened to me organically. As I said, I never really studied art directly. I come from architecture. So I'm always thinking about what's the best way a person can experience something spatially. So I like a public art, for instance, a lot more than, let's say, an indoor artistic experience, because I feel like people can have a larger spatial immersion when they're experiencing public art. Unfortunately, we don't see like super exciting public art around us all the time. That could be a way. But I'm also really open to, for instance, what's happening right now. We're looking at digital art on our screens, right? So I believe that art is everywhere and artistic experience is everywhere. When you pay attention, your soul is lifted by art. I don't know, maybe 20 times a day. You just need to pay attention. But framing this and highlighting this and letting people know that, hey, this is art and this is why it could be important. I guess it's helpful, right? In that, like, for instance, what you're doing, in that then people can be educated, because just like any other field, there's a history to art, there's a larger narrative to art. Like a lot of people feel in themselves, find in themselves a power to judge art. I like that, I don't like that. But you know, why? Just think critically. I think it's important. Why do you not like it? Tell me. Is it because you haven't seen this before? Because it's new? Or is it because someone told you that you shouldn't like it? Or is it just because you feel it very strongly? So I think these questions are important. But I myself, I think art can come from anywhere. I really admire the power of mainstream media and streaming media that I just told you. Like, I want to have a VR piece or an animated film or something. I want to reach more people. So I'm not really fixated on one versus another. I see why these institutions are important. But I also don't think that if you're an artist out there and if you're making your work and if you haven't put the work in a museum yet, it doesn't mean that you're not making art, right? It's just kind of like in the Lord of the Rings, there's the Sauron's eyes, like looking for the thing to pick. And if a curator who has the Sauron's eye haven't picked your work yet, it doesn't mean that your work isn't art. So
absolutely, yeah. I think there's a lot of buzz out there, and it's very difficult actually to see things, you know, and to sort of go through the old noise that you experience every day. And I absolutely agree with you that you may experience art 20 times a day without even realizing that. And
yes.
I think strongly that it's all about the education and the way we are told to look at art. And the minute you go into a museum, you've got expectations, and so whatever is being filtered, you know, vetted for you already, you would appreciate because somebody else would have studied about and created such a presentation that for you it's easier. So it's sort of you know, easing your job as a viewer, so that you don't have to make such a great effort to understand. So in a way, do you feel that social media and mainstream art is sort of beneficial to the viewer in terms of self-educating yourself? Or do you think it's creating even more confusion?
I think it's both at the moment. I just wish that, you know, more established or older art institutions took digital media more seriously. I think, for instance, what you're doing as an institution is very important, like educated people, creating a channel that's popular, that brings, you know, what's out there to their viewers. I think this is popular. Otherwise, I don't know, who's a very famous Instagram person? The Rock, for instance. I don't know, 56 minutes. If a The Rock likes an artwork and puts it on his Instagram, like, that would have a lot more effect than all the, you know, art museums online coming together and like pointing at something. So social media is, you know, we're kind of like a school of fish. We're like always going, the attention span is short. So, and I also try to tell myself, okay, you know, I've been in this for 20 years. I've been drawing for 40 years almost at this point. And I know that I'm a good artist, or at least I strive to be. But it doesn't mean that, like, if I don't have 50,000 followers, it doesn't mean that my art isn't good, right? So
You'll have to
again, I
play
think,
with all the algorithms as well, which is a mission
yeah, like,
impossible. You know, it's
exactly. And this is a note to all the makers out there. Like, if people aren't responding or people aren't liking, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do this. It's, you know, this is how it works. And there's also a lot of bad art out there that gets a lot of attention. Like, there is, of course, just like there are good fries that are crispy and fresh and you love them. I'm talking about fries because I haven't had fries since the lockdown, because I know how to make them and I'm lazy. But you know, there's good fries, fresh, and there's bad fries, soggy. You don't want to eat them. They taste weird. There's good art and there's bad art, right? So there's a lot of bad art there, soggy fries that get a lot of attention. So social media, I mean, I don't think it should be like it should be super important for yourself as an assessment of yourself as an artist, but it also helps, and it's also like a very open platform for sharing work. Like, you don't have to, you know, hobnob with gallerists or curators, etc. Like, you just, I'm, you know, sharing screenshots. I'm just sharing my process of making, and I get feedback, and I love that. So I think it goes both ways, actually, but we have to be careful. And I also think that there has to be more people educated in the field, kind of guiding these digital media trends.
Yeah, I agree. I think social media is a great tool that connects a lot of us, especially during lockdown. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it could be very addictive, and it could also influence you in a way that you may not realize that you've been sort of led to like some things that you wouldn't have paid attention to. So I think you need to have that critical mind when you enter into social media, and also look out for people who are, or any content that you might be interested in. So it's a dangerous game.
It is. And, you know, I think if you're prepared, if you already know about art, or if you're already educated in art or art history or design or whatever, maybe it's different. But if social media is the only source you're getting this kind of information, I don't know, maybe one has to kind of look deeper. But again, it's something I can't control. It's just happened. I adopted to it myself, and now this is how it is. You know,
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like
yeah.
trying to figure it out as I go, and I'm just trying to be more open-minded. There was a time where I was like, I would spend, I know, 15 days deciding what to post. I'm like, do I post this? What will people think? And then I realized actually people don't think. So let's just share.
Yeah.
But I think it's also very important to have channels that have really good content. And I also trust that the audiences realize that, and they realize the good content versus bad content. So
Actually, there's a question about this. There's been a couple of questions coming through. One is art still art with no audience? And the other one is, how would you define bad art / soggy art?
yeah, let's think about the first question. Is art still art without an audience? I thought about this you know, there back, I think in the 19th century or early 20th century, there's this question: is art for the artist or is art for the public? You know, do you make art for yourself or do you make art for others? And first off, it's a stupid question. Like, you make it for both. There's a lot of enjoyment I get while I'm making my art. When I'm drawing, and that's all I'm thinking. When I'm thinking, you know, translating what's in my head to the screen, or when the screen does something and it triggers me. Like last night I was playing with texture mapping and something weird happened and I loved it so much, and I just love that moment, right? So I do it for myself because I get an enjoyment out of it. And sometimes I'm frustrated because art isn't just enjoyment and, you know, bliss and euphoria. There's also a lot of frustration. So there's that part. The artist, the maker, you're dealing with a team, there's the process, there's a lot of that going on, and that has nothing to do with my audience, right? But then you're communicating something, and to communicate means there has to be two
Yeah.
or more, right? I had a Serbian colorist painter friend who was in his 90s. 10 years ago, I TA'd for him. And he said, Pinar, don't listen to what everyone else says. Art is about communication. And I was like, aha, that's true. Actually, I just looked at all my work. I'm communicating something, like I'm distilling some information and I'm communicating. So I think, you know, art is still art. Like say, think about a lonely sculpture in some forgotten garden, right? It's still there, it's still art, but it's activated when there's another person, you know, interacting with it. It's just dormant until it's activated by another.
I really like
Who
this
is
definition. Thank you for sharing that.
of course, I forgot the other question.
The other
by the way.
question is, well, one is a comment saying if you heard of newlife.ai, and then the question after is how would you define bad art / soggy art?
Oh, how do I define bad art / soggy art? Yeah, well, there's a long list actually. First off, I think this has to be context dependent. For instance, if a person believes they're a figurative painter, let's say that this artist, this art maker believes they're a figurative painter, but they're really bad with drawing, right? And because of that, they start doing something that's neither figurative art or abstract art, but they still insist this is figurative art. Then we have a better, how to say it, ground or platform to kind of judge whether this is good or bad. But when you move to some things as complex as, let's say, contemporary art, like for instance, I taught a class this quarter at UC San Diego called Art and the Brain. And of course, it was the time Art Basel happened, and Maurizio Catalan put a banana on the wall.
I was
taped
there.
it on the wall. And I'm teaching 250 engineering students, and I have to explain to them why this is considered art and why this is sold for, what was it, $200,000 or something? And they were like, well, I don't understand this, therefore I don't understand art, therefore art doesn't matter. Now I'm trying to convince these people that, hey, that's not just what art, there's so many other things about art. So we spent, I don't know, many hours discussing what makes that work good art, or whether this was good art or soggy art. So I have to say that I haven't come up with a conclusion yet, but one thing that was interesting that one of my students said was that it made them think, right? Like the piece made them think. And I think maybe that's the criteria for good art. I'm not going to define bad art, but you know, maybe we can focus on what good art is. I think another thing is, again, context dependent. If you're focusing on the context, is the artist like really good at their medium? Like, do they have mastery over their medium? I'm sorry, I'm old-fashioned. I still believe in the mastery over a certain medium. If you're a filmmaker, you got to know your Adobe After Effects and your Final Cut, and you have to have a good eye, right? If you're a painter, you got to know how to paint. I'm kind of like that. If you're a sculptor, you got to know how to sculpt, right? And then you can do something else, like Picasso. You can do triangles.
You can
I mean,
unlearn what you've learned and rediscover.
I don't mean that Picasso does triangles. I respect the guy a lot. I mean, but once you have mastery, then you can push the boundaries. But I think that's also important. And, you know, is there essence to it? Is it communicating something? Is it taking me from where I was, which could have been, oh, I haven't had fries for 2 weeks, or oh, I haven't done my taxes, and puts me in a different space where I am confronted with different emotions and different thoughts. I think a lot of good art does this thing to us where, you know, it's really creates a different affect for us. It changes the way we feel and think about something. It transforms our emotions and our thoughts, right? And it does it just very quietly. It does it in a very, how to say it, invisible way. So I think that's what good art does to us. And, you know, back to the banana, maybe controversy is something. a lot of people talked about the shock effect, etc. But I don't want to analyze the banana tape piece by Catalan. We can do this together another time. But you know, there are all these like things that good art does to you. So if it's not doing that to me, and for me, being in this field and not most, like, you know, I'm lucky that there are a lot of beautiful art around me and like artists and friends, and like I'm always inspired by new work. But then there's a lot of work that's just doesn't do it for me. So then I think at the end of the day, you decide for yourself as well. Like you kind of turn your gaze toward yourself and you're like, what do I feel about this? What do I think about this? What does my body, how does my body respond to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Just something to add. Her Vision, Zeba, just shared something saying that art is journalism. And I think, you know, this is probably a good response to the Catalan piece, because in a
Right.
way, you know, it's sort of like going on the news and shaking a lot of people. And I was there, and I remember when
Oh
the
my God,
actual,
you're
I was there, and I remember when the actual artwork was taken off the wall. So when I reached the wall, because there was such a huge crowd, and I was like, okay, well, I'm here. I made it all the way to Miami, so I might as well take a picture, you know, as a memory,
right.
you know. So I made it to the, after queuing for the selfie, they took it off because it was so crowded, and for security reason, other galleries weren't getting enough traffic, and so, you know, for fire exits as well, they had to remove it. And then
Right.
I've spoken to the gallery, and they said that the people, because there were 3 editions and they were all sold, and what you were actually getting, it wasn't the artwork, it was a certificate. So kind of like an
Okay.
investment. So you don't even get the banana, you just get a certificate, say that you have spent X amount of money, and so you made it to the news, you know. So I
Right.
understand that art, in that sense, it can be journalism. You know, it's an happening, it's an event, and then
Right.
you've taken part to that event.
Right.
Um,
But then, yeah, it's very true. Journalism, I think, is very true. And then it becomes more like, you know, how to say it, like the system that we call the art world. But that's the system, just like the Wall Street, right? It's a system, and it really has actually nothing to do with your personal artistic experience that you have with an artwork or in an artwork, or having an artistic experience, just, you know, cooking something in the kitchen, or I don't know, watching the sunset. Okay, maybe that was a cliche example, but it does it for everyone. Is there anyone in our audience who hates sunsets? Like they go to a sunset and they're like, I want to die.
Painful.
Such a
I'll
horrible
watch
thing.
it.
Such a horrible thing. I hate this so much. No, it does it for us. It does it. So there are these moments that we have every day. I think it's like, I think maybe it was Deleuze and Guattari in What is Philosophy. I might be wrong about the book, but they said that like art has to do with intensification of sensation. It's because we have bodies and we have emotions, and it's because we are creatures with, you know, all these nerve cells and, you know, living matter in us, that we have art, right? We sense things, and I think what artists do, or at least good artists do, is they intensify these sensations for us, and they highlight it for us, they emphasize it, frame it for us, right? And then it's a kind of a transformational moment. I mean, maybe this sounds way too spiritual. It doesn't have to be like that all the time, but I think, you know, they have something there, like this intensification and you know, the changing of the bodily moment, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, sometimes I feel that art for me is also a necessity, which it may sound completely silly these days, because what you need is food, water, and be in good health, right?
Right.
But in a
But
way, I
it's
need.
it's just all of us. We're like 18 people, 20 people here right now. Let's just imagine a world without art. Let's
Mm,
just imagine There's no art. There's like buildings around us, but there are no architects. There's no music. There's no fashion. There's no art. Like, what kind of a world would that be? I mean, I think there's this fundamental function of art that we ignore because it's not very tangible. It educates our emotions. It educates us as humans, and it uplifts us, or it makes us sad. It crushes our soul. It makes us upset. It makes us think deeper than what's on the surface. We just can't ignore that. I mean, otherwise, what are we? We're just, limited to or reduced to really basic functions. And yeah, I just like, for anyone who's like, oh, you're an artist, like, what is that? I'm like, just think about the world without art. No art, nothing. How would that be?
I don't know. I can't really imagine that.
My brain stops. I'm like, I don't know. I about the world like that. We probably wouldn't have
Actually,
anything.
yeah, on this subject, do you think that the use of technologies, like the increasing adoption of technology in art, will bring a more creative world, or a more sort of less emotional, brutal, or I don't know how to define it, but black and white world? How do you see like technology and AI? Because in a way, I'm tremendously fascinated by the use of AI, and I think there's a lot of potential, and I'm all up for exploring that and including that
Right.
into art. But in a way, there's always a fear of what these can turn into, and how these would influence us or would transform what we see. So I think there's also a fear of that. But what is your vision on?
Well, so I made this piece called the Kitty AI, and I don't really promote it on my Instagram as much, but that was my take on what AI could be. It was an AI that was trained to be a cat, and it had the emotions and feelings of a cat, because cats do have
I saw your
emotions.
work. Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
Questioning if animals feel, or if animals have emotion. Yes, they do, to different degrees, but most of the animals we keep in our lives have emotions, and any pet owner or a cat lover or a dog owner, anyone who's riding horses, would know this, right? So it's a stupid question to ask or assume that other living things don't have emotions and feelings. Another thing is, with AI right now, I think we're developing the prefrontal cortex, like the executive parts, etc. But there isn't emotional processing in AI right now. And if you come from neuroscience, you quickly realize that without emotions, there is no decision making. The reason we make really simple decisions with such ease every day, with aplomb every day, is because we have a very powerful emotional system in our brain. It's called the limbic system by some, and some people criticize this, but some people call it system 1, some people call it other names, but we have a mechanism in which we can understand, evaluate a situation very fast, and it's emotional, right? Any thing in our world, like from the trees behind me to what I'm wearing, to the things you might say to me, to like the stimuli coming from weather, etc., it has also an emotional impact for me. Like, I sense it. Anything that's sensed also creates some kind of an emotional impact. So with AI, I think two things stands out for me. It doesn't have a body. Like, it doesn't have a body that feels and senses. Like, for instance, skin is our largest sensors organ. It doesn't have a skin. It might have eyes, but it doesn't have this kind of holistic thing going on. B, it doesn't have affect right now. So affective computing is a domain. I think it will eventually come into AI. I think they'll eventually start feeling. I think Neuromancer by William Gibson is a wonderful book for anyone who's thinking about these things. It was written in 1984, but it's a visionary book, also like a book that influenced Matrix, the movie. which is shocking that some people right now, they don't even know what matrix is. But yes, neuromancer is really good because there it proposed two AIs, one of which was the architect Wintermute, and the other one was neuromancer. And the main difference was that neuromancer had emotions and feelings. So I think that's very important for us if we as you know, technologists, if we want to build truly intelligent machines that can think, let's say, like us and like other living things, that we find a way, or we devise a way in which they are also emotional beings, right? So I'm not talking about like hippie spiritualist anything here. I'm talking about a processing system that we have in our bodies. I think it has to be there. Other than that, I don't feel super threatened by the improvements. I just don't like that certain people have a lot more control over this than others. Like, it's not happening at a very democratic, open way. We all know this, like surveillance and big data. Like, there are certain people who have more access to this than others, and then we all serve as data providers. So there's also that. Those I'm not happy with. But other than that, it can be a very good thing to have as well if we do it right. And with the cat, I try to kind of offer a picture where, the cat loved everyone. It was an AI that loved everyone that it was interacting with. And I don't know if it's possible, but that's what I wanted to imagine.
That's such an interesting vision. When I saw that work, I was fascinated by the fact that an AI could have emotion and like humans, because in a lot of fictions, you see the AI sort of wanting to terminate the human life or taking over, rather than building that bridge and that communication and liking the humans. I was
Yeah. Oh,
I'm still here.
okay. I just have to charge myself. Speaking of AI and machines, I'm
Yeah.
dying.
But I think, we're nearly reaching an hour, and I know Instagram will close the conversation. So I just wanted to
Oh, okay.
wrap it up and say thank you for sharing all this knowledge with us, and thank you for everyone commenting and sharing questions, and thank you, our visions, and everyone commenting. It was very good. Also, somebody is saying data in Star Trek is a good example. Yes.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, I think, to sum up, this is a moment where we're like kind of locked down and thinking. We're distracted in a different way, but there's a disruption happening right now in our lives. And this is a good moment to really kind of contemplate on where we should go, or what paths we should pursue after this, right? And I think expanding this interspecies acceptance and expanding interspecies empathy is the most important thing right now. And when I say interspecies, I'm also including, maybe non-natural entities like AI. Like, can we find in ourselves the power to kind of include other living things, as well as other, non-living things that we're inventing within our lives, without exploiting them or without actually trashing them? I think that's the question. That's kind of the test for us right now. And and art will help us get there, because art is awesome, and it's just one thing where creativity is expressed in its pure form. So thank you so much, and follow me on Instagram.
Yes. Thank you for sharing
Follow
the work.
6666. That's my lucky number. So help me get there.
I'm sure they
Bye.
will. Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.
Good luck. Stay healthy. Stay safe. Bye.
You too. Take care. Bye. Bye.